Okay, everyone, this is Illini Students Supporting Israel going live. We are here for our event, My Truth Battlefield Ethics. And we have two IDF soldiers with us today to speak about their experiences. And it's going to be a fun event, so get ready.
Do we want to turn Okay. Hi guys. I'm Alana. I'm the president of Illini So excited to have you guys here. We're really happy also to have with us Tina and Abiyad from My Truth. So without further ado,
Thank you. Hi everybody, my name is Tivna Rockman. So first of all, I want to say thank you for having us. Thank you for coming and listening to us. It's great. I want to start my lecture, with a story. So as a student in university a few years ago, I participated in a scholarship. The scholarship was funded by an organization in Israel called Peres Center for Peace. This organization works a lot to bring Jews and Arabs together, Jews and Palestinians together in Israel, and creates a lot of programs. So one of the programs that I participated in was the same, to bring Palestinian girls and Jewish girls together by playing soccer. As you can see, the girls. And this was incredible. Seeing these girls playing together was really out of this world. Accompanying every group was a student, or a Jewish student or an Arab student. And I was in charge of the whole project. Once in a while we would meet only the students. And in the beginning of the scholarship, I came with so many expectations. For me, to come and meet Palestinian students was amazing. I've really never met Palestinians before that, because you have to understand that I grew up in a town outside of Jerusalem, and my entire childhood was waiting until the next bus explodes or the next shopping mall, and asking my mother, or not even, my mom doesn't even let me go meet my friends in the near park because she's not sure I'll come back. So I come to the scholarship with a lot of hope, but sort of like these are what I remember from these people are they're my enemy. They try to kill me and my family a few times a week, bombing and bombing again themselves. And it was an exciting opportunity for me. I really wanted to come to understand the other side, to listen, to sympathize, and to hear them out, basically to hear them out, to understand why, basically why. And the other side, I wanted them to listen to me too. I wanted to share my experiences as a child, growing up in the Second Intifada. I wanted to share my experiences as a soldier. And really we met, and in the beginning everything was okay. We talked about whatever 24-year-old girls talk about, you can imagine. But when politics came into the picture, and I really, as I said, I understand the situation is complicated for the Palestinians and for the Israelis. And I really understand. But when I wanted them to understand me, it was if nobody wanted to listen to me. It was if they were the ultimate victim and I was to blame for everything. They didn't even try to understand where I'm coming from. They kept on asking me again and again and again and again, how could it be? How could it be that you support the peace process and you served in the army? How could it be that you served in the army, that your parents, your family, your brothers, everybody you know? They couldn't understand the basic thing that we need the army to protect. Me, my family, my friends. Without it, there would be no Israel anymore. There would be no Israeli citizens. And when I realized that they couldn't even understand that basic thing about the Israeli society, I I was frustrated, and mainly I was really shocked. So remember this story, because we'll get back to it in the end of the
Okay, hi everybody. Sorry, I'm just gonna okay. Hi everybody, my name is Aviad. I'm 30 and I'm married. I have married to Aviva. I'm father to Doron, Yair, Nili, and Maya. And if you've been counting correctly, I had 4 children. Yes, I got married when I was about 5. And my lovely children. Anyways, I was actually born here in the States to 2 American-born parents. My mother learned in New York. My father was a graduate of Princeton, and I grew up in Israel and in the town south of Jerusalem. After high school, as any boy and girl in Israel is required to, I joined the army. I joined I joined the Givati infantry force and got accepted to the special forces. And I served there as a combat medic between 2006 and 2009. And in that time, and in the time proceeding until today, I serve in a reserves unit, also as a combat medic. And as part of that service, I took part in every major operation that there was in Gaza between 2006 and now, and including many smaller operations in Gaza and in the West Bank. On Friday, July 18, 2014, I got a call that I assumed I would be getting at that time. That was telling me to leave my pregnant wife and 3 children and to my business that I own and manage, and to go down to the south because the infantry entrance to Gaza, as part of the operation that was going on at the time, it was going to start, and the relevant reserves unit was being called up. The operation known as Protective Edge came after months, or really years, of years of escalating rocket and missile shooting on Israeli towns. Now, I'm not sure if it's here. Okay. I'm gonna just go back here. At that time, in 2014 already, we're talking about from 2004. They were shooting, the shooting of rockets and missiles started from the close, onto the close towns next to the Gaza border. We're talking about a lot of small towns like Kibbutzim, if you know, and a lot on Sderot. And by 2014, the rockets were already reaching Yerushalayim and Tel Aviv. And but the main mass of the rockets were still being shot on the towns in the south, on the Gaza border. Now the operation's goal was to really dismantle the capability of the Hamas terrorists controlling Gaza and find and destroy their missile stashes, their producing centers, and to destroy the missiles themselves, the arms, and in addition also to destroy the tunnels that the Hamas were building at the time, and had already completed many of them, that were going under the Israeli border fence into Israel, and their goal was to execute kidnapping of Israelis and murderous attacks on civilians. After all this background, I think you could understand that it's really hard to imagine a more just cause and a more just operation. During that time, because of the obvious legitimacy of the cause, the fighting in Gaza was really a national consensus in Israel. Civilians from all over the country were sending packages of food and donations to the soldiers who were, like myself, who were sitting on the border at the time, going in and out of Gaza into shorter operations. And the people from the south were actually driving through the fields to try to bypass the military police who blocked off all the entrances to the area and get to us to give us hot food and hugs and underwear. It wasn't easy. We were there for about 3.5 weeks, but we felt like we were really doing a very giving Israelis the most trivial of rights, the right to live in safety and in peace. A few months later, reports started coming out about the operation. Now, we never thought that the international reports would be accurate or fair, but when an Israeli NGO came out with a report trying to present Israeli soldiers as war criminals and claimed that the moral code of the army was thrown out the window, and in their words, it really touched the nerve. Now, the report gained traction abroad, but also very much in Israel. And for the first time, a lot of Israeli soldiers really who fought in Gaza, but not only, also fought in the West Bank, whether their brother or father or kid, or that they served in the army in other positions, were really feeling hurt and offended. Now, it's not combat situations are not sterile. They're not easy, and everybody knows that mistakes could happen. But we also know that as soldiers, as combat soldiers, that we put ourselves, and we are told to put ourselves in extreme risk, and we go through extreme measures, many times in great personal risk, in order to maintain the high moral standards that we are trained by. One of those soldiers was Avichai Shoshan, and he decided to write a Facebook post. I'm gonna go back up to it, and he just told a few stories about his service in Gaza and in the West Bank, and he started it with the words "I'm breaking the silence," and he ended it with the hashtag #MyTruth. And he went to sleep. The next morning, he woke up with thousands of likes, shares, and comments on his post. And more reserve soldiers from all over the country started sharing their stories about their service. And slowly this, and everybody was ending it with the hashtag #MyTruth. So this, so they decided to open up a Facebook page called #MyTruth. And later on, Shachar, Matan, and Avichai, who run the organization today, they made this movement into an organization. Now, it's important just that you understand that this Facebook post, wasn't some sort of a hasbara act. It wasn't a political stand. It was really just a protest coming from a soldier who had been in these situations and who put himself in personal risk in order to maintain a high moral standard that we were all trained on, and felt just offended and insulted. So the organization gathers and supplies a platform for Israeli soldiers to tell their stories. And one of those stories is Timnaz.
All right, so now I can introduce myself. So I'm 27 years old. These are a few pictures of my life. I grew up, as I said, outside of Jerusalem. I'm the youngest of 3 brothers. This is my dog. She's bigger now. And I grew into a family that was kind of weird, basically. But the one thing I did know about my family is that we were very, very cool, for sure. But the other thing is that my family and my parents, we love Israel. We would do about anything for our country. My parents are very, very connected to the land. My name, Timna, is a national park in Israel, in the south of Israel. And I was born in 1990, May, and I know I'm pretty now, but as a baby I was blonde and blue eyes, and the government just had to create this park on my name. Of course. So my father, they love the desert, and that's why they called me. They named me on the park. Anyway, as I turned 17, and I get the first calling to serve in the army. And I have to think about what I want to do. Now I know I'm personally not tough enough to be in combat, but I know I want to do something meaningful. I don't see myself making coffee for my commander or typing data on the computer. The thing I know about myself, and I'm sure about myself, is that I love standing in front of crowds. I love when people listen to me, especially men. And I love teaching, and I love guiding people. It's what I did my whole childhood. So when I thought about it, I knew I wanted to be an instructor. And it was considered very cool where I grew up to be an infantry instructor. So I decided that that's what I want to be. I went through this whole day of tests and interviews, and I got it. The only thing I knew when I recruited into the army is I'm going to be an instructor on combat soldiers, infantry soldiers. Besides that, I didn't know anything else. I got my position, and they told me I have to teach soldiers how to use weapons. Now, my expertise was small missiles that go on your shoulder. Now, as an instructor, obviously, I have to teach these soldiers how to aim, how to shoot, how to walk with it when you're in combat. And you have to understand that for me, I've never dealt with weapon in my life. I mean, I grew up in a small town. I mean, I had no connection to it, really. And as I go through my training, I realized that actually I have two jobs. One job is to teach these soldiers how to maintain their weapon, for sure. But the other job, and the more important job, is to convey to these soldiers that they have the morality behind the weapon. And what does that even mean, morality behind the weapon? There's a saying in Israel called Tohar HaNeshek. If I have to translate it, it would be the purity of arms. But basically, it means how do you go into the battlefield, and how do you use your weapon in the battlefield in the best way possible. And I'm not talking about how you aim in the best way. I'm talking about when to use it, not how to use it. Israeli soldiers know that they have to be 100%, 200% sure that any time they use their weapon, they have to be sure the person that's coming to attack them is threatening their life, or they're shooting at terrorists, or they're shooting at a house with weapons, something like that. If they're not 100% sure, they know they can't touch their weapon. And this value, Tohar HaNeshek in the IDF, stands very, very high, very, very high, much higher than. Never mind. But it's on the top for sure. It means much more to the commanders in the IDF than the professionality of how to use the weapon actually. And if you wake up every Israeli soldier in the middle of the night, they'll say the same thing. Now, I mean, to teach soldiers just how to use weapon, that's very easy. You go to the shooting range, you look at the aim. It's not that complicated. But the army trains girls like me and spends a lot of money, hours, months of courses and training and teaching us how to stand in front of a crowd and how to talk to soldiers for this reason exactly. Because the IDF understand that it means so much more that the soldiers not just know how to use their weapon, but when to use their weapon. And that's the important thing. And that's what you have to understand about the IDF. That's the basic, most important thing about the IDF. So if I started my army service, not really sure how am I supposed to deal with teaching soldiers how to use weapon, I finished my service very confident about what I did and very proud of what I did. And just a few pictures of me. This is my father and brothers, and okay. And I think Aviad can tell you. I told you a bit behind the scenes, and Aviad is going to tell you actually what happens in the battlefield.
Okay, so so as I said, I served between 2006 and 2009 in Givati, and the story I'm going to tell you today is a very abbreviated version of a few days of the winter of 2008, in which my unit, the Special Forces of the Givati Brigade, we entered Gaza in one of the first attempts to end the beginning of the escalation of the shooting of the rockets on Israeli towns. And I hope that with this story, I will be able to maybe also put you a little bit in our place as a 20-year-old soldier who's put in these positions. But maybe also for a second I'll try to put you into the shoes of also the commanders who are not much older. The commanders could be 22, 23, 25, and they need to make in a very short time, they need to make very big decisions, and they need to do it in the best way possible. So my squad was actually at the time in the Egyptian border. That's way down south. Well, it starts over here, but we were way down south at the time, and we weren't doing anything very interesting at that time. So it was a Thursday night. We were sitting around the bonfire, and our squad commander comes running towards us, and he says that one of the dozens of rockets that were being shot a day on Israeli towns at that time, there were 100 within a few days that were hitting Israeli civilian towns. One of them hit a kindergarten, and there was no one in the kindergarten, but these are pictures actually. Wait, I'm sorry. This is here. These are pictures from that week. This is a kid who was killed a few days before that in Sderot, and missiles rockets that were being shot on Israeli homes and towns, and the government decided that they're going to try to put an end to it. So now there's a few things that you need to understand at this point. Okay, the first one is, does any of you remember the term disengagement? Itnatkut, disengagement from Gaza? Okay, so in 2005, the Israeli government, led by Ariel Sharon, decided to pull all the Israeli presence in Gaza and move them to the east side of the border. And that means about 8,000 Israeli civilians and all the towns, talking about schools obviously, synagogues, cemeteries, and all the army presence until the last one out of the Gaza Strip. The hope obviously was that this would bring quiet and peace to the area. There was talk then about making Gaza into the Singapore of the Middle East. And what happened, in fact, was that Hamas, Islamic fundamentalist terrorist group, took over shortly, about 2 years later, in 2007. They took over the Gaza Strip, and the PLO, who managed, who were the regime in Gaza at the time, where their leaders were thrown off roofs in Gaza, and as we see, the Hamas terrorists over there sitting in their offices, and they were tied onto motorcycles and onto the back of motorcycles and driven on the back of them around Gaza. And what they did on the aspect of fighting Israel is that they basically turned all the civilian towns on the Gaza, on the Israeli border, on the Gaza-Israel border, into military bases. They started producing missiles and rockets from civilian towns, storing arms and weapons in civilian houses, and preparing military-like stations to protect these stashes and missiles. The other thing, we'll get back to that in a few minutes. The other thing that you need to understand is that, ordinarily speaking, when you're talking about a military operation, especially of this magnitude, then we're talking about usually days, if not weeks of preparation. We're talking about learning the mission, learning the maps, getting your gear ready, and maybe most importantly, coordinating with all the other friendly forces who are going to go into this mission together with you, and so that there won't be any friendly fire. We had 1 day to get from the Egyptian border in the south and come up to the Gaza border, learn the maps, learn the mission, and get our gear ready, and be ready to go into one of the most dangerous places on earth that basically was untouched by Israeli forces since the disengagement. This was the largest operation since then. But obviously, army like the army, 24 hours later, Friday night, our faces are painted, helmets on our head, heavy bags on our back, and we're standing about 5 kilometers away from a town called Sajaiya. in the north part of the Gaza Strip. We were standing 5 kilometers away from the fence because you don't go in, you don't show yourself right away. So where it says Gaza up there is not Gaza City. Gaza City is more like that is Sajaiya, right there. And we were gonna go in and engage the terrorists and try to weed them out and find these stashes and destroy them. We stood there making the last preparations to go in, and the battalion commander called my squad over because we were going to lead the way in, and he wanted us to leave a little bit before everyone. And so he called us over, and he wanted to say a few words. We all get together, and we sort of silence down. And as the battalion commander is getting ready to start talking, a rocket falls about 100 meters away from us. And we all are a little startled. We look around. Everybody's fine. And the battalion commander we look back at him. He's sort of half smiling, and he says, "I've said enough. This is what we're here to stop. This is what we're here. You guys understand your mission. You know what you're going to do. And I hope this goes well, and that I see you all on the way out." So the walk-in wasn't uneventful. Our very skilled front navigator, Doron Asulin, and our commander, the squad commander, realized shortly after we crossed the fence that a scouter was watching us. So obviously, at this point, we know that there's no element of surprise. We know that the terrorists will probably report back to their forces and be waiting for us to come in. Regardless, the operations was going to be a quiet entry, which means that it's only infantry at the first stage. No tanks, no armored vehicles, no air force, no artillery. Just us. Now, I'm going to stop the story for a second. I'm just going to ask you a question. If you were to plan a mission, a military mission, inside a civilian populated area that you know that the terrorists are using as bases and as storing good places, what would be your method? Would you maybe bomb them from the air the same way that they're doing to our civilians? Just bomb them with no regard to civilian life? That doesn't seem like a reasonable right, obviously. So maybe you could not do anything. Maybe those are the two, on the spectrum, there's those two sides. Or somewhere in the middle is what we did in 2009 and what we did in 2014, which was to use the Air Force to drop demi-bombs that don't hurt anybody, but tell the civilians that they need to retreat if they know that they're nearby, or that in their house there's terrorist activity or missiles or arms, that they need to leave. And that if not, then they're taking responsibility on their own lives, but we're coming in. And we use tanks and we use artillery, and we drop flyers from the air telling all civilians to get away from any terrorist activity because we're coming in. That's a method that was used also in 2009 and also in 2014. In our case, we did our mission was to go in quiet. Only infantry. We wanted to engage the terrorists. We wanted to define them. We wanted to weed them out. Now, obviously, the risk for us in this case is higher because we're going in without the fire support and the fire cover that we could have had. But it also, we need to keep in mind the whole time that we're fighting in a civilian populated area, that the civilians were not told to leave. So as far as we're concerned, when we go and we engage a house that we're going into, it's a civilian house, which means you do not shoot at the house or in the house until you're shot upon. You do not use any fire forces until you are shot upon, because as far as we're concerned, this is still a civilian area. We're looking for the terrorists, we're looking for their stashes, for their arms, for their missiles, for their launching pads, for their producing centers. But it is still a civilian center. So we started to see the first houses of Sajaiya after not short walk, and the first roadside bomb explodes. It wasn't very close to us, so it didn't hit anyone. But a gunfire was opened up on our force right away. It was my squad, as I said, was in the front. It was targeted at the company who was following us, and a few of them got very superficially wounded. And my squad led the way into the first house that we were supposed to. And we entered the house. As I said, no fire, no shooting at the house, no shooting in the house. We go in slowly, carefully. As far as we're concerned, this is a civilian house. Now, it is a strategically important house that also the Hamas knows that it's one of the first houses that we're going to see when we come into Sajaiya. So we assume that it probably is booby-trapped, or that there will be terrorists waiting for us in there. But regardless, until we are shot upon, we do not shoot at the house or in the house. And we were lucky enough that it wasn't booby-trapped. There weren't terrorists in it. There was a civilian family, and they were remained unharmed and treated in as best as possible. Another medic and myself set up a place in the house to treat the wounded from the other company. They had superficial gunshot wounds in their legs, and they were in pretty good spirits. And a few minutes after that, we were already told to head out to the next location that we needed to. The other company stayed in that house, and my squad moved on to the next location. Now, we passed through a field. We already started seeing the house that we were supposed to get to. And as I said, the maps that we were working with were not very up to date, and we didn't have a lot of time to learn the area before going. We only had 24 hours, all in all. And so approaching the house, the commander and saw that there was a fence that was blocking the way to the house, and there was a big land drop that really made it very hard to get through. So he kneeled. We all kneeled after him. He started fiddling with the fence and trying to either cut it or move it. And the blast of gunfire is shot in his direction. He falls back. He wasn't hurt. He just flew back from the impact of the rock that was in the gravel that was in front of him exploding, and he fell back, but he was fine. The front navigator, who was on the same line as he was, Doron Asulin, saw the source of the fire. He waited a second because he was very, very afraid that to hit other friendly forces, because, as I said, the coordination here was a little bit lacking, and so he asked in Hebrew, "Who is it?" Waited another 2 seconds, shot 2 rounds, and it was answered by a blast of gunfire in his direction. He fell back. I was a few meters behind him. I ran towards him. He had no pulse. He wasn't breathing. The rest of my squad at that point put themselves in between me and the house that we needed to get to, and gave gunshot fire, so that me and the other team, who was the part of the squad, was meant to put him on a stretcher so that we could proceed with the treatment and get him ready for evacuation. The commander at that point decided that that we were unable to get to the house that we needed to. So he decided to go into a house that was next to us. Now again, this is a house that we know nothing about, because this wasn't even in the original plan to go into. So we really knew nothing about this. We had no intelligence on the house. We're taking fire from one side, and opening up another front of fire is the last thing that you want in this situation. We're even more clumsy at this point because we have a stretcher and a wounded, and we need to go into this house. And again, as far as we're concerned, this is a civilian house. We were shot at from a different direction, but we were not shot at from this house that we needed to approach. So we did not go into this house with fire. We approached it quietly and in the most professional way that we could, but with no gun fire. We were lucky enough that we did not get into another battle. At that point, I had already realized that Doron had a gunshot wound in his neck that was superficial, and a gunshot wound in his chest, and that my respiratory assistance was futile. The air was just going straight out of his chest. And later on, I would learn from Doron's father that in the hospital report showed that he died from the bullet that went into his chest and ruptured his aorta. So he was dead within a few seconds I got to him. During the next 48 hours, we found ammunition, rockets, launching pads, guns, and military-like stations in and near civilian homes. And Operation Warm Winter, that's what it was called, ended after only 48 hours due to the fulfillment of all the operation's goals in less than half the time that it was intended to be. And my squad and myself re-entered Gaza again before the end of that.
So I'm taking it back to me and the girls. I was frustrated, I was shocked, and you have to understand that in Israel there isn't one family that doesn't know, that hasn't lost someone in the army. Brother, father, friend, boyfriend, husband. I didn't grow up, and I don't think that the army is perfect. Me, as a child, I lost my brother. He committed suicide as a soldier. But as a family, we didn't think that because of that, the army doesn't have its legitimacy to be an army, despite what happened to my brother. And this feeling, it's still. I mean, what I'm trying to say is that the army in Israel has to deal with a lot of complicated situations. The conflict, Palestinians, Hamas, dealing with a terror organization, fighting a terror organization, not fighting a regular army. Me and Aviad, we shared 2 stories, but there's so many other stories. Soldiers in the army, they're young, they're 18, 19, 20, and sometimes they have to make life-changing decisions in a few minutes or sometimes in a few seconds. There isn't in the world a perfect army. I hate the saying that Israel is the most moral army in the world, because I don't know if that's true. What I do know is true is that, as I said, Israel has to deal with a very delicate situation, and it goes to the extreme to take care, to do it in the best way. Before I conclude, in the last few months I've been working on this project. We interviewed soldiers to tell stories about their service, like me and Aviad did. And I want to share with you one story. It's a short video. This soldier is telling about Protective Edge, one of the ceasefires, and how he's talking about the kidnap of Adal Wood. Never mind. No,
So then maybe exit presentation. And then sentence there.
okay.
Yes. Is it link?
No, it's supposed to be. Never mind. Okay. Never mind. So for conclusion, if you want to support us, if you like what we have to say, please follow us on Facebook. We have a website. You can see all these stories that we were talking about on our website. We need you as ambassadors on the campuses. We try to show you the bigger picture. We try to show you something that you won't see on Facebook or Twitter or just by watching the news for a few minutes. If you want to really understand the story of Israel and the army, you have to talk to Israelis for it. Thank you so much for listening. And we'll take ask questions.
Hi. You could start. I'm just. Here's some paper. Just write on. Hi.
So you guys showed that the IDF is one of like the most moral army and how they like have these ethics and rules that they agree upon. So I just wanted to share my recent experience in Palestine on the border and just tell you if this is like something that they do regularly or whether it was just a one-time thing. So for me, when I went 3 years ago, I was on the border crossing from Jordan to Palestine, and I was snatched from one of the IDF soldiers and thrown into a room. And on that room, I was on the floor, and it was 2 women and 4 men IDF soldiers, and they asked me to strip with a gun to my head. And I stripped all of my clothing except my undergarments, and that wasn't enough for them. And they had me be completely naked in front of them while the men were laughing and mocking and getting real at me and pointing. And they detained me while I was naked for 2 hours. And then after that, they made me put my clothes back on. And that was that time. And then I went when I was 12 years old too. And I was crossing the same border. And we were standing in a straight line going to the next checkpoint. And we have to stand in a straight line or else like we'll get yelled at. So I was standing in that straight line, and I think my sister like tripped me or something, so like I stood to the side. And one of the soldiers yelled at me in Hebrew, put a gun to my head and spit on me. And I went back into line. So like I had 2 separate instances on both of my visits. And in general, like in jails and in prisons, like women get raped by IDF soldiers in order to do false confessions. And like a prime example is just nowadays.
Okay.
So like I'm just saying like all of these instances are real life occurrences, and like you say that like the IDF's like so moral. So I want to know like, is this like what you guys are trained to do? Is this, how is it moral? And like these are stories that are real.
Look, I obviously.
Like, do you condemn what happened to me?
I obviously. If what you're saying did occur, did you report it to anyone? I mean, really?
Who am I going to report it to on the border? I won't be let in.
Do you have a date that this happened?
Yeah.
I'll report it for you.
No, then I won't be allowed.
That's not true.
I'm not allowed in Israel right now because I was born and raised in America.
I guarantee this.
And I'm not allowed in
I guarantee this. Okay? If what you're saying is true, and you come to me after the speech, give me your name, give me the details of the event with the date, I will personally, if this story is true, I will personally make sure that anyone involved with it will sit in jail. Okay?
See, like if I give you my information, that's Canary Mission.
It's what?
You ever heard of Canary Mission?
No, I'm sorry.
It's a website that blackmails Palestinians, and so now they can't ever enter Palestine from that website.
Look, I'm sorry. I obviously cannot react to a story that I know nothing about. If you're asking if I'm trained for that, it's the farthest thing away from our training that's possible. I could give you examples here of soldiers who, after we arrested that people who I know from the battalion that I was in, who after we arrested a Palestinian terrorist from his house, if they spoke not nicely to him, they were banned from going into more activities later that week. And if they took a picture with him, they were kicked out of the unit. So your story of telling me that, I mean, raping is just, you know what, I'm not even going there because it is beyond anything that any Israeli soldier would ever imagine. It is beyond, I'm sorry, just preposterous claim. And if you have even a shred of evidence to support that claim, then I'm sure that you could have 1,000 outlets to tell it to, and that a real investigation will occur. But and I myself, I guarantee this is being videoed, okay? And we could you have my word, okay? If you come to me after, give me the real date of this occurrence, and the place where it happened, the exact the passage. There's a few passages between Jordan. Give me the exact date and time that this happened. I will personally make sure that the first thing I do when I get back to Israel, even before, is make sure that if this story happened, everyone involved will sit in jail, and I will personally have you in my house next month.
I'm not allowed in Israel because I have a Palestinian passport.
I have Palestinians in my house all the time.
I retain a Palestinian passport, the green
No,
one.
Palestinian is Palestinian.
The green holds
Palestinian ID or
Yes,
Israeli
Palestinian
ID?
can't see
ID.
the Western
I've been-
Wall with a Palestinian ID.
I have the green ID. I got it 3 summers ago.
And
I'm
I'm
not-
telling you that I
I go to
employ
Jerusalem.
Palestinians, and they drink coffee in my house.
With the blue
So, no, they have a
no.
green ID. You want me to call him?
I was arrested when I was
Nice.
8 at a checkpoint for having a green ID, and I wasn't even.
You don't get arrested for having a green ID. Listen, guys, I'm sorry, but I mean, if you have real questions, we are really so glad we're here. We came from Israel to answer these questions. But I mean, come on, come with more than I can't drink coffee because I have a green ID. Every morning I have. My Palestinian employee asked my wife yesterday that he met at the supermarket if she needs any help bringing the groceries home. I mean, come on, because he knows that I'm here doing this. He managed my business when I was in 2014 in Gaza. Okay, so I don't need you to lecture me about how to treat Palestinians. I help them a lot more than you do. Does anybody else have a question? Please.
I find it really interesting that you brought up Operation Protective Edge as your example when talking about the ethics of the Army, given that it's been internationally and within Israel by former soldiers sort of lifted up as an example of horrible ethics in battlefield. But I just want to know how you explain the discrepancy in death toll from Palestinians versus Israelis. Was it something like 1,500 to 10 or something?
First of all, about the soldiers they were talking about maybe 60 soldiers, 100 testimonies from that. That would be 0.0% of all the soldiers that fought. 0.01 of all the soldiers that fought in Protective Edge. As I said, rotten apples, they exist in the Israeli army. And the Israeli army has a system to deal with this. As Aviad told you, we have a system to deal with these incidents. They happen. It's tragic, but they happen. And about the casualties that you were talking about, first of all, you have to understand that Hamas, that's his main goal, to hurt as many Palestinians as possible and to use it as leverage against Israel. They keep hostage Palestinians, innocent Palestinian civilians in their homes, so Israelis can target these homes.
But the UN, the Goldstone report found that to not be true.
And then Goldstone report took it back.
The Goldstone report was about Castled.
Sorry, you're right.
That was in 2009.
You can see videos on YouTube.
And he recanted the whole thing.
You can see videos on YouTube of the spokesman of Hamas telling the people, don't leave your houses. We need you as human protection. We need you. Stay there. They hid missile launchers in UNRWA's schools and orphanage and kindergartens. What can you say more about a leadership that doesn't care about its own citizens? Israel does the most not to hurt these innocent people, but if Hamas wants these people to get hurt, I mean, there's so much that we can do. We can alert people, we can tell them that we're coming in, but if Hamas is keeping them hostage, I mean, it's tragic. It is. But I don't know what more we can do.
I want to add, because it's a good question, and the numbers don't look good, obviously, because if eventually you have to put an end to during Protective Edge, there were 4,000 in the period of the month, and I think a few weeks before, talking about 6 weeks. There were 4,000 rockets shot and missiles shot on Israeli land. And this is the UN's numbers, okay, in that same 4,000. Now, the fact that Israel has created technology that the time that the Israeli civilians need to go under into shelters, that at least the rockets don't destroy their houses, and also the success rate was pretty good, but the Iron Dome didn't hit all of them, obviously, and a lot of them did get through. People were killed from these rockets. eventually the Israeli government needs to decide that enough is enough, and that we need to stop this intolerable shooting on Israeli land and on Israeli civilians. So, and the only way to do it is to get the rockets, to get the missiles, to get the terrorists. And if the Hamas is using their own people as human shields, then we could only do as much as we do to protect their civilians' lives. But there are civilian casualties on both sides. Yes, more on theirs, and it's sad and it's tragic. And the most tragic thing about it is that the Israeli government cares a lot more about Palestinian lives than the Palestinian government.
So Palestinians are to blame for their own deaths.
Look, it's not a question of Palestinians, okay? The
The
Palestinians have
Palestinians that are in those schools or in those homes are acting as human shields. That's the argument, right? So they're responsible for their own deaths when
I'm saying that they're being hijacked, kidnapped by their own
thousands
government.
of Palestinians are being kidnapped
Yes.
and held as
Yes.
slaves.
Absolutely.
I've never seen evidence of that before. I'd like to see
We'll
that.
go on YouTube and I'll show
Yeah.
you.
Okay.
Please.
My question revolves around the fact that why do you think it's so hard for Palestinian citizens themselves to speak out against their own government? If their own government is so corrupt and does this, why do you think it's so hard for them to actually speak out and come out in public and say, look, our government is making this really hard for us? Like, why is that so hard for them to do? Do they ever get in trouble for it? Like, what?
I think the answer is in your question. I mean, the government is corrupt. Hamas, it's not, they were chosen in a democratic way,
12 years ago.
but obviously they're not ruling in a democratic way. They're
The current leader of Hamas in Gaza, Yahya Sinwar, his former job was to kill the people who collaborate with Israel. That was his former job, his official Hamas title, to kill mashtapim. Mashtapim are people who collaborate with Israeli forces.
and when they sit in their huge homes with pools, while their citizens don't have any jobs and don't have food. So that's their leadership.
Why do you think more Palestinian people don't speak up against them?
Because they're afraid, they're terrified. I would be terrified as well. If my government treated me like that. Yeah.
Please.
Okay, so obviously, I feel like the people that are suffering the most on the whole grand scheme of things are the Palestinian civilians in Gaza. So do you see like anything really changing, or we're just gonna keep going through this again and again and again every few years? Is there something that has to change? What would it be like?
So the first thing that has to change is the leadership. I mean, the first thing that has to stop is the terror. If the terrorism doesn't stop, we have nothing to talk about. And the furthermore problem is the education in Gaza. I mean, they're taught to hate us.
Inside.
It's in their school books. It's in their curriculum in schools. I mean, the first thing that has to happen is that they don't hate us so much. They're not taught to hate us. That's the first thing that has to change. I think the second thing is to be in control of where all the money goes from the UN and from the US. Because for now, it all goes into terrorism and building tunnels to enter Israel.
Yeah.
Okay, so my question is a bit long, so bear with me. General Golan, who is the IDF deputy chief, he said that there were similarities between Nazi Germany and Israel today in terms of signs of intolerance and violence. And he did retract that statement, but it was only after severe backlash from Israelis. However, other IDF, like generals, etc., have also been critical of how trigger-happy IDF soldiers are in terms of killing Palestinians. And there have been Israeli soldiers who have, for example, wore X's on their uniforms to mark how many Palestinians they've killed. Or there were the Israeli soldiers who sponsored the campaign "One Shot, Two Kills," referring to killing a pregnant Palestinian woman to kill both her and her child. So can you comment on this? Can you talk about what's being done to counter it? Why does that kind of trigger-happy violence exist within the most moral army in the world?
We didn't say that.
You asked a few questions, and they're all good, and I'll be happy to answer all of them. about what General Golan said. I think that, first of all, I don't think he was referring to specifically the morality of the army. I think he said that he recognizes certain movements in the Israeli government and Israeli society that remind him of certain movements that in the 30s in Germany.
And arguably your military is part of your society.
No, obviously, I'm going to answer, I promise. Okay, I'm just trying to make it to get this to get it accurate. As you said, this was broadly condemned by all Israelis, really, from all sides of because that Israelis know that the Israeli society is really as far as you can imagine from fascist and racist. It's really racism doesn't exist in Israel. It's not something that there is. There is a conflict between Israel, between Jews or Israel and Arabs. This conflict goes back 150 years. It has nothing to do with racism. There are plenty of Israeli Arabs. You could put down your hand. I'm just answering, okay? You could also listen. And there are plenty of Israeli Arabs who serve in the Israeli army. Muslims, Druze, Bedouin who serve in the Israeli army and are treated as equals. There are problems. Some of the things that you mentioned, I've never heard of the one-shot, two-kill thing. It sounds awful.
All over the internet.
I'm sorry, maybe I wasn't up to date. It sounds awful. If it's true, every single soldier who was part of that should be condemned and kicked out of their units. I mean, it doesn't sound like something you should sit in jail for, but it does sound like something that you should not have the right, the privilege to serve in the IDF, if that's the mindset that you go into battle with. Absolutely. And I think that not only the thousands of testimonies that Timnat have been working on gathering for my truth will concur with what I say, but I think that 90% of Israelis will, 95% of Israelis will agree 100% that sort of just distastefulness and I don't even know what to call it, is something that should be migrated and just by everyone. And it's disgusting.
It is. It sickens me.
If again, I have never seen it. If what you're saying is true, it's disgusting.
So then I guess I'll follow up just really quickly on about the comment. So first of all, I don't agree with the terminology of Jews versus Arabs, which both of you have mentioned multiple times. There are Arab Jews, there are Palestinian Jews, and so it's not a religious, like a religion versus a race. It's Israeli, like occupier versus occupee. And so another thing I picked up on was you mentioned that Israel is not fascist,
I'm just
racist.
going to stop you for 1 second, okay? Sorry. Because I don't have a problem with what you're saying. I do just want to say is that my truth isn't a... We talk about... You're getting in a little bit into... You're going into a very political occupation and race. It's not really our mandate. It's not what we're really talking about.
Versus Arab and
I don't agree. And if you want afterwards, I'll be glad to talk as much as you want about these things. It's just really not what we're here to talk
Then the
about.
last thing that I want to ask about how the IDF and Israel is not fascist nor racist. Could you comment then on the sterilization of Ethiopian Jews, especially? It is true.
We have one here.
Sterilization.
We have one here.
We have one right here behind me. I talked to you about our experience, and I can pull up the reports that say
I don't know what
that the health
sterilization means.
minister.
I mean, I know what it means. I don't know what you're talking about.
Right. So the health minister of Israel, and I can pull it up right now, actually. Health Ministry Director General instructs all gynecologists in Israel's 4 health maintenance organizations that they are not allowed to inject women with long-acting contraceptive Depo-Provera because multiple organizations and reports arose that they were sterilizing Ethiopian Jews within Israel.
Look, this is so beyond what we're here to talk about.
No,
I have no clue what you're talking about. Seriously, I don't know. I can't react on something that I don't know where it came from and what are you talking about. I'm sorry. I mean, I know it's cliche to say it, but I have many Ethiopian friends. They're close to me. They served with me, and they're as much my brothers as anyone else who served in my squad, and I can't add more. I have friends and
right, and that's you personally. But if you're representative of like the IDF, for example, then
the IDF has the ratio of Ethiopians in IDF are much higher than they are in the general population. They serve in the most integral positions in the IDF. They're respected, they're loved, they're like any other Israeli civilian.
The story that you're talking about was blown up out of proportion, all right? I don't know which website you got it from. The internet is full of crap, sorry.
and it's quoting your actual health ministry director.
Which health minister?
No, like you can quote.
I understand. What are we talking about now?
No.
This came out in 2013.
2013? I don't know. Look, I really can't comment. But I'm sorry, I really don't know.
Would you guys be interested in hearing a comment from an Ethiopian Jew from Israel?
Yes, let's
We
hear
don't,
it.
I mean, it's like your token, like we don't want to hear from the token.
She's not
Please.
She's a representative. She's here because she
Since
wants to
we're
be
like
known.
on limited time here, I'm gonna wait because I can go home and Google like top 10 worst things about Israel. So since you have plenty of experiences with like Palestinians, as you mentioned, I just want to like ask, like since you talk to them on a daily basis, can you just explain like your personal experiences with them, like their accounts on the situations that occur since they experience it and you experience it every day?
I'd be happy to. Again, this is way beyond the scope of our organization, but on a personal level, I could say that I probably spend most of my day with Palestinians. We talk about many things, very little bit about politics, because it's not that interesting, and because that we both know that our politicians are politicians, and that they promote themselves mostly, and he'll agree with me a lot more than I will be willing to say that his politicians are only care about themselves. I mean, if you're talking now about, if I asked him what do you think about the reconciliation between Hamas and the PLO, who I don't know what these terms, if you all familiar with them, but if I asked him what he thinks, then he says, it's really not really about Hamas or about the PLO. It's all personal, and he'll go through the different interests of the different leaders of the different organizations, and what each one of them, how this deal will help them line their own pockets and promote their own agendas, and they discuss their leaders really, and the bottom line is they know that the money that's coming in aid, instead of going to their schools, then is going to build houses for their leaders and into their Swiss bank accounts. And I'm not talking about one guy. I'm talking about really the most of the everyday Palestinians who you meet.
Is this like what they like say to you? Like
yeah, when you get close to them and you're not now together with this, you're talking about a wave of terror that started 2 years ago in Israel. That many Palestinians. From the day-to-day Palestinians came and ran their cars into Israeli bus stops and stabbed them in supermarkets that were known for the Israeli and Palestinian cooperation and living and shopping together, and there was stabbings in these supermarkets. It's complicated, and could you just put down the hand? Sorry. It's complicated, and the situation is not, doesn't seem like it's going anywhere good at this point. That's the truth. And all I could say is that on a personal level, when you meet the Palestinians living in Hebron, in Beit Sahur, in Ramallah, in Shechem, they want to work with us. They want to live with us. They want to. They don't talk about the army raping their women, because they don't. And they talk about work and about their kids and about schools. That's the truth.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'll get back to you guys. Okay, we'll let some other people also, please.
So, in your opinion, just based on with the people that you've interacted with from both sides, what do you think is the overarching goal, the hope that people have for the future? What do you think? Where do you think people want to be?
Who we all want, no? Good sports, good beer. I don't know.
Yeah, I can agree to both of those.
Okay. Please.
I have two questions. One is a technical one about My Truth. Why does this organization need to exist? What is it pushing back against? Is it an answer to breaking the silence? Is it, well, so that's one question. The other thing is about, you mentioned that My Truth and this presentation was not and is not meant to be political. And that's really just, you know, to me it seems shocking that, you know, we're talking about a very, very, very political situation. This is an army, any army, the U.S. Army, anything they do is political. So is the Israeli army, and especially when you're talking about an occupation that exists, that's real. So how do you argue that this is not political?
For your first question, so it's true that My Truth was created after the report of breaking the silence, but it's not the issue to counter breaking the silence. The issue is to give soldiers or ex-soldiers or reserve soldiers a platform to share their stories and to share their experience about the army and to try to educate people about the Israeli army, also Israelis and also people around the world. About your second question, My Truth tries to represent the Israeli army. Doesn't the people in the organization you can find from the far left until the far right. The army has no connection to politics. The army is there to protect Israeli citizens, and that's its job. If there is a concession, there is an occupation, what Bibi thinks or what he doesn't think, it has no relevance to the army. That's why it's not.
Yeah, sorry, you raised your hand a lot.
Okay, so on September the year 2000, one 12-year-old child was shot actually by an IDF soldiers. The child and his father were both hiding behind the cement cylinder. The fires...
Adura. Muhammad Adura.
Yeah, exactly. The fires kept firing at the child and his father, even though the child was crying and the father was waving. And eventually, the child was killed and the father passed out. So you tell me, on what ethical truth is this based now?
Sorry, just wait for this to stop. I don't remember the details of this incident, and I think that I do remember that the army issued a report proving that the child was killed from Palestinian fire.
Okay, so he was like, shot by his mother or what?
Excuse me?
No, was he shot by?
No, look, I'm not an expert on that specific case, and I can't.
I mean, the situation.
No, but
yeah.
What I could say with 100% certainty is that that child and his father were not targeted as they were not. No soldier looks at a child hiding behind some block, some cement stone, and targets him. They were caught in crossfire, and you know what? Regardless of whether it was Palestinian gunfire who killed him or Israeli gunfire who killed him, it's a tragic story. Nobody could argue with that. That the kid was not to blame for anything, and it's tragic that he lost his life. But in military situations, if you remember what there was in 2000, is that exactly. We're talking about. Let me tell you what I remember from 2000. In addition to Muhammad Adila, because I lived near Yerushalayim in that time, and I remember being shot at every single time I drove into Jerusalem. Every single time.
Yeah, but this child had no weapons.
I didn't have a weapon either. I was 13. Okay. Now there were buses blowing up on a weekly basis, on a bi-weekly basis.
What did the child have to do with this?
You're absolutely right, nothing. I'm just saying that the situation was crazy. I didn't have anything to do with it either. And I was being shot at, and my friends were blowing up in buses and in coffee shops, okay? The situation was escalating and the Palestinians started the second Intifada in 2000, and it was a lot of bad things happened to a lot of innocent people on both sides, mostly in that time to Israelis. But in the case of Muhammad Adura was not to blame for anything. But you give me one example of a kid who was caught up in crossfire and say that because of that the Israeli army isn't moral. I'm sorry, it doesn't work like that. You're talking about a complicated situation with ongoing terrorism. In 2000, you're talking about a civilian life for Israelis that you cannot imagine. You're talking about buses blowing up almost twice a week. You're talking about waking up in the morning and looking at newspapers with the pictures of 13 Israeli teenagers who were in a bus on their way to school who got blown up. They didn't have anything to do with it either.
But the situation of
No, it's really not a single event.
No.
We're talking about twice a week
5
for years.
Just imagine yourself. Just
I don't
try
have to
picturing
imagine, I
yourself.
lived it.
You did what?
I don't have to imagine, I lived it. My best friend died when he was 6 years old.
By a bus blowing up?
No, but not by a bus blowing up. I don't have to imagine the violence. I lived it, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and also the situation of Al-Dura wasn't complicated. He was just a few meters away, and he wasn't inside a house that was inside the house of terrorists.
Like I said, I'm not an expert on that case. I could say with 100% assurance that he was not targeted. He was caught up in crossfire, and it's a tragic loss.
But the situation, he's not referring to the situation exactly in that place. He's saying everything that occurred around it within the months before and after, and within the entire geographic region. That was what was complicated, not, you know.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm talking about that situation.
Yeah.
So forgive me, I forgot. What is the name of the ethical code that states that you must only fire when you have 100%? Okay. So from your personal opinion, would you believe that your comrade from your story, in which he first, understandably asks, "Who is this?" in Hebrew, because he's uncertain. Would you believe that him firing 2 seconds later without a response follows this code of conduct of knowing with 100% certainty that you only pull a trigger when you are in fear?
He was shooting at the source of fire that was shooting at him. I think that qualifies, yeah.
But you said the fire was a response to your
being.
comrades.
No, we didn't shoot like that. We were walking towards the house. We were shot upon. And then my commander fell back, and the Lon Asulian, who saw the source of the fire, wanted to make sure that the people who were shooting at us weren't our own forces. So he asked in Hebrew who it is. When he realized that there was no response, then he realized that the person who shot at us a second ago was probably a terrorist.
So it probably isn't 100%.
He was shooting at us.
If someone's shooting at you, I would respond.
I think that's really, that's sort of the definition.
It's not an army, it's a terror organization, so if they shoot, they're terrorists.
I mean, what would you have him do? Ask him for ID? They don't carry cards saying, "I'm a terrorist." If they shoot at you, then they qualify. Please.
So my question is, obviously you're making a distinction between terrorists and civilians, and I think in some cases that is a distinction that should be made. But then, what happens in circumstances like the Kibbutz massacre, where it's documented that orders were given to maximize casualties in a town that was mostly civilian women and children? Sorry?
What are you talking about?
What are you talking about?
The Kibbutz massacre.
I'm sorry. I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to.
So it's there was a massacre in the city of Kibbutz, and it was where mostly women and children were killed overnight, and it was orders were given to maximize casualties.
I don't know if that's true. I'm sorry. If it is, when we're talking about, just to get perspective, we're talking about in the 50s, probably, right? In the 50s. סליחה? No, שנות ה-50. So, like I said, it rings like something I know, but I'm sorry, I can't connect the dots right now. We're talking about the 50s, just so that we're in perspective, okay? We're not the army, as all the other armies in the world have changed and evolved for the better. I think in many cases, at least in the Israeli army cases, since then. We're talking about a very, very different reality. Where again, I don't want to get into a history lesson. I know that today, as someone who serves and served, we are instructed, we are ordered to take to put ourselves many times in great risk in order not to hurt civilians. So, to me, the concept of maximizing civilian casualties is something so foreign to the Israeli army that all I could say is that today it's very, very, very far from anything that could or does happen. Please.
Changing the tone a little bit, I'm curious with your children and your future children, how you feel about them one day having to serve in the army. Of course, it's a great responsibility. And in the future, we don't know what the need for mandatory serving would be. But how do you feel about them one day going to the army, and also if they were interested in combat, would you support being in a combat position, or how would you feel about it?
So I'll talk about my imaginary. You know, it's the same in Israel that every Jewish mother prays that her children won't have to go into the army. I don't know. I think my children will have to go into the army, sadly. And if my kids would want to go in combat, I would completely support it. I think I wasn't in combat, but the experience is it builds character, right? If I want my children to, what the value that I want my children to have is that they have to protect their family. I think that's, if you grow on that, you have to be an incredible person. So that's
look, sadly, I believe that that's what my kids will have to serve. I hope that their service is uneventful, and that all they do is bonfires and not anything else, and have girls like me not teach them how to use weapons that they'll never have to use. That's the truth.
Okay, I think we're gonna stop here because it's 7. But if anyone has questions, I'm sure you guys will stick around for a little bit and come talk. We're gonna take a quick group picture, so please don't run out.